So, hello and welcome to the Global Mindful Drinking Festival. My name's Dru Jaeger. I'm one of the co-founders of Club Soda. Especially welcome if you're watching us live or if you're watching us on catch up. It's great that you're with us. I am really excited about this bit of conversation that we've got coming up. Dr Valerie Mason-John, Vimalasara, they are an award-winning writer, teacher and coach, and author of 10 books, including 2 which are really useful and important to me in my work in Club Soda, supporting people to change their drinking. One being 8-Step Recovery, using the Buddha's teachings to overcome addiction, and another, Detox Your Heart, Meditations for Emotional Trauma. Valerie is also the co-founder of the 8-week course, Mindfulness-Based Addiction Recovery. And that is so pertinent to the work that we do in Club Soda, and offers so much to people who are wrestling with alcohol and other substances and embarking on a journey of change. Valerie is also president of the Buddhist Recovery Network, senior teacher in the Triratna Buddhist tradition, and a British person who lives in British Columbia, Canada. And welcome. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you for that great welcome. Yeah, thank you. I'm here all the way from Canada.
Yeah. So well, just before we went live, you suggested that we might begin this with a practice, and I wondered whether you'd be happy to lead that for us.
Yeah, definitely. I thought I would begin us with the practice of AGE, an acronym called AGE, which means become aware of the body, gather the breath and expand the breath. And it's seen as a 3-minute breathing space. So we'll do 5 minutes max. We can expand that, but for the sake of today, let's just settle onto your seat. And you don't have to put yourself into a meditation spot, just settle onto your seat. And A, becoming aware of the body. And we become aware of the body by just simply noticing what the body is touching. So my hands are touching hands, fingers are touching fingers. I notice that. My feet are touching my socks, and I notice that. And my sitting bones are touching the seat on my sofa. So that's how we simply become aware of the body, just simply noticing what the body is touching. G stands for gather, so we begin to gather the breath. So we're simply noticing what the breath is touching. So for some of you, you may be aware of the breath touching the abdomen rising and falling. Or you may be aware of the chest area rising and falling. And some of you may even experience a touch of the breath on your upper lip. When you breathe in, it's cool, and when you breathe out, it's warmer. And some of you may even experience a touch of the breath in your hands. It doesn't really matter where you experience the touch of the breath, but let's just see if we can take a moment to just be with the fragility of life. And E stands for expanding the breath. So it's an invitation to take a breath in as deep as you would like, and expanding the breath throughout the whole body. And one more time, an invitation to take a deep breath in, and expanding the breathing throughout the whole body. Yeah. So that's the breathing space. And Dru, I'd love to do the 5-second breathing space, because really this breathing space isn't about being in meditation posture, because when we're triggered or when we're activated, there's absolutely no way that we're going to sit on a chair or cross our legs and do a meditation. Okay?
No chance.
So I always say that this breathing space is like, even if you just remember to just become aware of the body, or it might just be just gather the breath, or it might just be just take the invitation of the breath in and out. And one of the ways you can see I used to smoke, see the thing. And I always remember a friend saying, if you want to stop smoking, this is what you do. And this is the 5-second breathing space. I invite you to do it, Dru. It really works. Because those of you who still smoke, or those of you who used to smoke, when something was happening and you were triggered, what did you do? You went to your packet of cigarettes and you had, because it regulated you because of the inhale. Okay, wasn't so much the actual nicotine. Actually, the nicotine may have got you addicted. It was just actually this inhale, because it just regulated and grounded you. So yeah. So if you feel a bit silly, you could put a pen there or whatever. It works if you work it, and you're worth it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing it. It's so interesting, because I teach the breathing space as part of our courses now, and it's where we center our discussion in the group that I run on a Wednesday evening. And one of the things that I say to people is precisely what you said, is that it's a great emergency meditation. If you're standing in your kitchen in front of the drinks cabinet thinking, oh crap, I really need a glass of wine, I don't know what to do, just to notice that you're thinking and feeling that, take a moment to breathe, and then come at the world from a place of conscious intention rather than just being responsive to your triggers. It's so helpful to people.
Sure. Yeah.
So one of the things which I've heard you say, and you've written in a number of different books, is that what you have to offer is your recovery. And I wonder whether we might start there. One thing that you wrote in 8-Step Recovery, which I feel is pertinent, so I just wanted to read it, was that unlike someone with alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping, or other addictions, I could not say, well, that's it, I will be abstinent from food for the rest of my life. I needed to eat to survive. I had to find a relationship with food that was not going to kill me. And that really resonated with me. As somebody who has, I recognize those patterns of having used food in my own life in different kinds of ways, as well as other substances. I just wondered if we could really start there. And you've been on this road of personal recovery yourself for some time, but if you cast yourself back to those early days before you set out on this, is there anything that you'd wish you'd known then, or that you'd done differently? How did you get to start, I guess?
Yeah, there's two questions there. What I have to offer is my recovery, and then we'll come to what you quoted from the 8-Step Recovery book. I always say that actually every single one of us, that's what we have to offer, is our recovery. And so what I mean by that is to actually live recovery. Because it's so often I used to be one of these people, actually. I tell people, yeah, this is what you should do, this is what you need to do. And I got to a point, Dru, where all these people were recovering and I was still in the hell realm of addictions. One day I woke up, it was just, it was fatal blow. And I thought, well, hold on a minute, and what it was, I think I had people saying to me or writing to me, well, thank you so much. So much. And I always remember a really good friend of mine, having a disordered eating, and a friend saying to me, thank you so much, because it really stopped me in my tracks, and I've let go of the bulimia, I've let go of the anorexia, and I'm thinking, well, I'm still in the midst of it, you know. So in a way, really, I really do believe that each and every one of us, that's what we have to offer, is our recovery, and that's how do we live what we talk? How do we walk what we talk? And that's been very much my practice. And food, gosh, it was easy to let go of the alcohol, you know. Um, and the reason why I let go of the alcohol is because it was a gateway drug for
Mm.
me. When I drank alcohol, I would be triggered into binging. Yeah. And the buck had to stop, because I just didn't want to be putting my head down the toilet anymore. You know, and there were times when I almost killed myself through it. Yeah, the dentistry that I have in my mouth. I always say the one thing that I have to pay for is my dentistry, because fortunately I have a very good dentist, so people don't really notice it. But I have a lot of dentistry in my mouth because of the acid making the teeth crumble. Um, so this thing about food, yeah, you know, often I can't stop eating.
Mm.
I can't stop eating. Well, actually, let's say that actually I started off being anorectic, and that's it's on the continuum, but it's very different from the bulimia. And actually, I was very controlled. It's I think with the anorectic behaviors, it's like if you can't control anything else in the world, the one thing that you can control is your body, and the
Mm.
one thing that you can control is what you're taking in. For me, I just I was so punishing to the body. I used to this is when I was like 20, 21. I used to cycle 4 hours a day, 2 hours to college, 2 hours back, and live on 3 cream crackers. So
Mm.
I'm glad I'm speaking to a British audience, because you know, North American
We
audiences
understand what those things are.
are, you know, it's like we could say I'm cream crackered, which means we're knackered. But anyway, I used to live on 3 cream crackers, and can you imagine
Mm.
cycling 4 hours a day? And my body couldn't cope with it, and I didn't want to eat, and I started purging and binging, you know. And what I had to come into relationship with, what were my alcohols? So just as an alcoholic has to drink, but there's certain drinks that they cannot drink if there's somebody who cannot have control over their drinking. Because I think alcoholism is on a spectrum,
Hmm.
which is great that you have this program of mindful drinking, yeah,
Yeah.
and having a completely different relationship to alcohol. But for some people, alcohol is poison in the body, and
Yeah.
they just can't drink. But they still have to drink tea and coffee and water. So I always say that those of us who have disordered eating and who are bulimic or compulsive overeaters, what are your alcohols? And for me, my alcohols are sugars.
Mm.
And I have to be really mindful of sugars. It's like yesterday, I I got into some chips. I don't eat chips off. Oh, crisp. They're called crisp.
Crisps.
Speaking to a British audience here.
Yeah.
So I look at a packet, and the packet, I'm like, oh, there's sugar in there. Okay, this doesn't have sugar. So I go for the one that doesn't have sugar,
Mm.
just because I know that if sugar gets into my system regularly over a week, I'm in trouble.
Mm.
So it's like I wouldn't say I'm completely abstinent from sugar. Like the other day, you know, my traveling back from a long journey, my friend had a milkshake, and I had a tiny bit, but I thought, okay, this is oh, I need to be really aware of that. Okay, I had a tiny bit, because that could slip into more and more and more. But basically, I rarely have sugar. I mean, there's no sugar in my house. I call it rat poisoning. There's no
Mhm.
rat poisoning in my house. I look at labels. Yes, I eat fruit. Yeah, and if I ever have a sugar kind of craving, then it'll be grapes, or Ice cream. My ice cream, I freeze bananas.
Oh, yeah, it's very good.
I blend them with a bit of avocado and a berry, and that's my bit of ice cream if I need that, you know.
Mhm.
But it's not every day. So what I would say is that those of us who are compulsive eaters or bulimics, one has to be really clear about what are your alcohols. So I don't eat bread. Like bread has got all this crap in, and I can't stop, you know. But uh, there are foods that I can have, and I enjoy eating now. I
Yeah.
do enjoy eating. Another thing, I if I go out to eat, it's not I can't go out to eat every day. Some people, you know, in North American culture, it's like you can be eating out every day. I can't do that because we know in restaurants they put sugar. They put a lot of sugar in the food. I don't eat at Thai restaurants because Thai food is full of sugar.
Hmm.
I just can't. I just can't do it. You know, I start craving. I go to Thai restaurant, I eat, and the next thing, you know, I'm craving. I don't pick up, but I realize I'm craving.
Mhm. I find it so interesting, this conversation about food, because there are very many people in the club soda community who, you know, come to a point of realization where they go, I can't have alcohol in my life at all. I can't have anything that looks like a moderate or controlled relationship with it, you know, as you know. But there are people, very many people in the community who go, this is kind of a relationship that I want to work out in some way. You know, I can recognize the damage that it does to me, but there are positives that come from it as well. And I wonder, like, your experience of food, your personal experience of food, how that kind of shapes your views about the kinds of relationships that people have with alcohol, especially.
That's a great question, and what comes to mind is the word denial. Don't even notice I am lying.
Hmm.
Okay. And I think that really it's individual, and one has to get really honest and truthful to themselves. I mean, if we think of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on, you know, bereavement and that bargaining stage and that denial stage, and at some point you just have to get really honest with yourself. I really think that, yeah, I'm somebody who could be a moderate drinker. I you know, alcohol wasn't my thing, you know. In fact, if there was alcohol left in my house, I'd tip it down the sink, apart from the champagne maybe. But then you never left champagne, it would go flat, so do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or the or whatever. So I could be a mindful drinker, and I had to get honest with myself that it was a gateway drug, that actually, if I kept on having alcohol in my diet, I would keep on binging. So I
Hmm.
had to get really honest with myself. Yeah. And there are people, like, for me, I have to get honest with myself. I cannot eat chocolate moderately. I hate those people. Just like some alcoholics hate those people who can have a glass of wine and put it in the fridge. I can't do that. I've
Yeah.
tried. I'll put the chocolate in the freezer. I'll chuck the chocolate in the freezer. Yeah. But it ain't gonna stay there because it's gonna come out 10 minutes later. You know?
No,
So, you
no.
know, I have to get honest that there's certain cookies, like,
Hmm.
I can't have cookies in the house.
Yeah.
I have one cookie, I'd have two, and the next minute the packet's gone. So that's I just so for me, there are some things that I have to just acknowledge that I can't do moderately.
Hmm.
And there are some things. There's a drink that I like every it's not an alcoholic drink, but it's got you know, banana and coconut and pineapples, but and it's like, wow, you know, it's like I'll have a little bit of a sip, and a week later it's still there and I have to throw it out. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I have to recognize that there's some things that I just can't do moderately. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's so important, isn't it? To that place of honesty with yourself about what you can and can't do that helps you live well. And it's definitely one of the things that see people struggle with. You know, actually, had a conversation with somebody literally today on this subject,
Mm.
saying, I've taken a month off drinking. You know, I feel like I'm in a good place. I'm wondering whether I could include alcohol in my life. I don't know, you know, and people getting stuck at this point of like, I don't know how to construct a relationship, a life which does or doesn't have alcohol in it, you know, because it's been such a central part of people's thinking and, you know, way of living for such a long time. I wonder whether sometimes there's also some reluctance to let go of something which has been a comfort and a friend to us and a constant companion and all of those things, for all of the destructive things that we know that it does, actually a fixed point in our lives, and a real need for people actually to grieve that letting go as well.
Yeah, there's also peer pressure. I mean, you know, it's. I know myself, because I don't drink alcohol, that there are people who don't invite me to certain things because they don't want to feel uncomfortable, and so your social network can get smaller. And then, of course, if you come from a family who all drinks and you're not drinking, what does that mean? It's not easy. But the benefits, I am so much happier without alcohol and drugs in my life, and without having the disordered eating in my life. I had those three things in my life, and they were protectors. Yeah, they were adaptive behaviors. They were things that helped me, what was my friend, and protected me from my vulnerability. And at some point, they stopped working. I remember getting to the point, Dru, where I realized I don't need this food anymore. I don't need this. And I didn't know how to stop. You know, I got to the point when with drugs, I mean, you know, with the drugs, that was, I was addicted to drugs. I couldn't do a certain drug moderately. Okay. I couldn't do that. But I was aware that I talk about it in Detox Your Heart, that it was having an impact on my mind, my brain, and I needed to stop. My nostrils was collapsing. I needed to stop. I could stop. Yeah. But with the food, I just didn't know how to stop. And so I was at this place thinking, I don't need this anymore. And I don't know how to stop. And what I would say to people is that there are a lot of recovery programs out there, which is fantastic, because really you need to be the agency of your recovery. And what is your recovery going to look like? Yeah. And I would say, don't kid yourself, because I think it's really important to, part of your recovery program, I think, is important to go to the recovery program who understands the alcohol, who understands the food, or who understands the drugs, yeah, or who understands the porn, yeah. It needs to be, I'm not saying all of it, but it's important, because then we're getting honest. Yeah, that's part of the recovery, getting honest. Yeah, getting honest with ourselves, and then getting honest with others. I mean, yeah, I mean, that moral inventory about getting honest, you know, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Transparent. I want to say transparent, because I think honest can be quite loaded. And what did honesty look like in certain people's families? Some people grew up like, you know, telling a lie was being honest, you know, that was the family culture. So I want to say being transparent, being
Yeah.
transparent.
Yeah, I also think one of the other things that we've, and maybe this is kind of related, evolved in recent years, but sometimes I think we use honesty as a weapon, and actually can use it as a weapon against ourselves. So you know, holding honesty in one hand, but also holding some kindness for ourselves and others as well, I think is a really kind of useful balance for people to work out how to strike.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you for naming that.
So one of the things which I wanted to talk to you about, you're based in British Columbia, obviously, and as Club Soda's membership has grown in North America, we've come from we're all British. One of my co-founders is Finnish, you know, but we come from definitely from a European British kind of cultural background. One of the things that we notice, particularly as we start growing in North America, is actually there are some real differences in drinking culture between Britain and North America. You know, a bar in the States has a very different place in society than a pub in England. And we've got very different attitudes to drinking and public drunkenness. And we also seem to have very different attitudes to recovery and the kinds of stories that we tell about what it's like being somebody who struggles with alcohol and what the roots are. And, you know, there's a very strong AA 12-step tradition in North America, which doesn't really have the same kind of influence in the UK. And we sometimes kind of tell very different stories. And I wonder, you've lived in both cultures. I wonder, what do you observe about drinking in the two cultures, but also what do you observe about how people come to change their relationships with alcohol?
Well, one of the biggest things that I observe, or I talk of differences, I rarely get to see alcohol here in North America because they're not sold in supermarkets. Yeah. So for me, it's so interesting. I went into a bottle shop, and I went in when I used to chew chewing gum. I don't chew gum anymore. And I went in going to buy chewing gum, and they were looking at me as if I was crazy because, you know, if I went into an off license in England, I could buy chewing gum. Yeah. So that's really interesting that actually for me, here, I rarely see alcohol, whereas when I go back to England and I go in a supermarket, there's a whole aisle of alcohol. So I'm not saying that that means there's less drinking. But what I am saying is that actually, if you don't want to drink, it's very easy to guard the scent stores here in North America because you literally have to go into a bottle shop. In America, it's not the same in all states. There's some states which do have alcohol in their supermarkets and some states that don't. In Canada, it's the alcohol is controlled by the government. Yeah, so it's government stores. So that, in a sense, is really big. And then also the pub culture. We here in Canada, we just don't have pub culture. You know, basically, there are there are tapas bars that's becoming quite trendy, and basically alcohol is with food. And for me in England, I would say that difference in drinking, that actually the Brits often drink on empty stomachs.
Yeah.
You know, it's not with food. I can remember when I'd be in Europe, going away in Europe, and who would be birthing, as we say here over here, or who would be puking up, as we say in England, and it would be the Brits, right? So there is a different culture in drinking, and I think also the bar, it's like, you know, kind of got had the bar. There's a limit, isn't there? You know, 10 o'clock bars close. And so how do you get that drink in? You got to get all that drinking in before the bar closes. So definitely alcohol looks very different. And then also culturally, when I think of my Black culture in England, we were so much into the sugar, like Thunderbird and Pink Lady and, you know, Special Brew and Red Stripe. There just seemed to be certain drinks that were particular to the Afro-Caribbean, the African descent cultures. I don't know why, but definitely the drinks which seem to have high content in sugar. And then, yeah, I mean, it's very hard for me to say what do I observe in the drinking culture because I'm not part of the drinking culture here. So I don't really see it. It's fascinating, actually. I went out to dinner with some friends the other day. They invited me to dinner. They were all drinkers. I wasn't. And I was really quite shocked in how the restaurant really pushed alcohol. Really pushed alcohol. I was really quite surprised by that. And then I was up in wine country in Asoyas presenting at a conference, and again, wine country really pushing alcohol and wine tastings, you know. So that's the thing in North America. There's lots of wine states or provinces which
Hmm.
yeah, kind of brew wine, or I suppose that's not the word you say, brew wine, but which make wine, you
Yeah.
know, walking through the vineyards, like walking through the vineyards. So I was walking through the vineyards with the grapes, and the grapes are really nice. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I hear what you say about not being part of drinking culture, but you are very much part of recovery culture
Yeah.
in the States. And I wonder what differences do you observe about North American and European approaches to this business of change? Do you think there are differences?
I think that definitely there's a very long history of 12 steps in North America. I mean, I can remember coming to the US. I live in Canada now, but I remember going to the US 30 years ago, and it was fashionable for people to be in a 12-step program. It was just fashionable in the circles that I was in. And I would only say it's over the past 10 years that it's become more fashionable to be in a 12-step program in the UK. Yeah. What I'd also say is that Buddhist recovery is so much bigger in the US, and I suppose we could ask why. And I think, you know, if you think about it, then, you know, Bill W. Was American, although we know the 12 steps came out of the Oxford Society, which was British, but actually the 12 steps was popularized in the US. And in fact, she's just passed, but my neighbor just across the road from me, her father founded 12 steps in Canada and had
Wow.
all the, yeah. So, um, so there's a there's been a culture of not drinking or being in recovery. And then if we think of Buddhist recovery, then we have to think of people like Noah Levine, who really popularized Buddhist recovery. Or let me dial back, Kevin Griffin was the one who really, actually, I would say, was responsible for promoting Buddhist recovery, or making recovery explicit in the Buddhist teachings with 12 steps and Buddhism. Yeah. And then opening the doorway for Buddhist recovery to happen, to emerge, to spread out into the world. So again, in a way, when there's been a cult of recovery, Buddhist recovery was really following on the heels of what 12 steps had already created. Although there was a bit of a schism, you know, coming to the book that I wrote, I had, or Paramabandhu and I, more me because I was so visible out there, I had attacks about how dare I write a book on Buddhist recovery, and this is going to destroy 12 steps, and you are destroying people's recovery. I mean, this book, and this was from British people.
Wow.
Think of, so in a way you see that 12 steps, because 12 steps was new, and really getting wills, and you know, really becoming much more of the culture. And I had British people kind of telling, you can't bring this book out, you know, how dare you, the pushback. And it's so interesting, like, if you think this book was written by two Buddhists from the Triratna Buddhist community, which is huge in England, how many of Buddhist centers will have 8-step recovery meetings? And the reason why they don't have it is because 12-step people have said, you can't have that. It's not
Mm.
safe. It's dangerous to have Buddhist recovery. Yeah. So again, that's one of the things that I've observed, that there still is a stigma towards Buddhist recovery. Yeah. From the 12-step communities, and a lot from Buddhists. And I'm not saying all the Buddhist centers are like that, because there are a couple who have stuck their heels in and said, we are doing this. So in terms of what does people's recovery look like, it's individual, isn't it? I think what's really interesting, Dru, that you have this program of mindful drinking.
Mhm.
I think it's controversial in the recovery world.
It
It
is,
is,
yeah. I can
it is
tell you it is. People
controversial.
shout at me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's controversial. So, and I'd say that I'm not aware of the same in North America. I'm aware of mindful eating, which is
Hmm.
interesting, isn't it? There are mindful eating programs for you to go on, learn to mindfully eat. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, where are those learning to mindfully drink alcohol, which
Yeah.
is controversial. So in a way, I would say that England, because it's a smaller place, I mean, that's a smaller place, it's easy to be perhaps a bit more experimental. And plus as well, you don't have the long history of 12 steps. I mean, 12 steps has been in England for a long while. It has, but not in the same force as it has been in North
Hmm.
America, not with so many meetings. I mean, here in Canada and America, especially with AA, it's almost everywhere you can go, you can find an AA meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is true in London, actually, an AA,
Like London, I'm
yeah,
talking about the whole of
the
England.
whole of the country. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. No, I
England's
think there's,
tiny. England's tiny, rural places, but even in you look at how big. I mean, the province I live in, British Columbia, is bigger than England. Okay, geographically, the size bigger than England. You can go to the most rural places, and you will find an AA 12-step meeting. Yeah,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, which is amazing, actually, and there is, I mean, one of the things which I think comes out again and again in the research about different approaches to recovery and what works and what doesn't. One thing which comes out again and again is that 12-step programs help create community for people.
Mm.
And particularly in the UK, AA is absolutely fantastic at creating community, especially for older men and especially for older white men. Now, that is problematic for other members of our community in all sorts of different ways, but actually, does create that sense of togetherness for people, which can be absolutely foundational in helping you create and sustain change, can't it?
It can, and I'd say the demographics of 12-step meetings are changing. I know when I first went to a 12-step meeting years ago, I just freaked out because it was like I just didn't see any reflections of me there. I'd either go to a disordered eating meeting and it would be all white women, or I'd go to an NA meeting and it would be all white men and blah blah blah. And it's changed over the past few years, especially if we think pre George Floyd, pre the pandemic, going online. There are and again, this is the difference. What I observe, in the US, because I lived in the US as well. Like there were, 20 years ago, there were meetings for gay people, right? 12-step meetings for gay people, meetings for Black people, and now there are meetings for BIPOC people, and I know somebody in England who runs a meeting for black women, 12-step meetings. So it is changing, and I think
Mm.
really it's to empower people to set up recovery programs, just like you did. It's like just like I did.
Yeah.
It's to create something that works for us,
Yeah.
rather than waiting for it to change so that I'm welcome. Because this thing of inclusive, are you just going to include me into a predominantly white space? No, it has to change. So
Mhm.
the only way it's going to change is if I can begin to create spaces for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually one of the reasons. So in Club Soda, we run an event called Queers Without Beers. All three of us as co-founders identify as queer, and we know that drinking in the LGBTQ community is a really big deal. So for the past 5 years, we've been running pop-up events in gay bars and in other places specifically for LGBTQ people who aren't drinking. Some people are in recovery, some people who have never really got on with drinking in queer culture, to come together, because it's it's part of who we are, and it's consequently something that we can offer to others.
I've got this big grin on my face because it just makes me smile that three queers founded this program, just like 8-Step Recovery. We're both queer. We both founded the program, and I think that's really important. It's important also that actually, as a Black person, I also founded co-founded a program. I think
Mhm.
that is really, really important, which is, of course, accessible to anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Could we talk a bit about that? I found your book, 8-Step Recovery, really personally very helpful. And I know that there are some people who run 8-Step meetings in the UK. But could you, for those who haven't come across 8-Step Recovery as an approach, could you give us a brief outline of what it's about?
Okay, so I'll just go through the steps just really briefly. Well, firstly, what I want to say is actually, Dru, Kevin always laughs at me and says, I've stolen your line, Kevin Griffin. What I want to say to you is that Buddhism is the oldest recovery program that we know to date. Okay. When the prince became woke, the Buddha's first discourse was that there is addiction to hedonism, which is lowly, coarse, and unprofitable, and that there is addiction to self-mortification, which is lowly, coarse, and unprofitable. And what was needed is the middle way. Okay. So, what I want to say to you is in places like Burma, the monks have been using the Buddhist teachings for years to work with alcoholism and to work with other addictions. Okay. I'd say that also Buddhism is the oldest therapeutic program that we know. If you study the Abhidharma, and it goes through all the different mental states that we have. So what Dr. Paramabandhu and I did was really making explicit in the Buddhist teachings the path of recovery. That's what we were doing, because it's implicit. It's implicit in there. In fact, I would say that I know many people myself. When I started going into the rooms of Buddhism, and I'd say the rooms of Buddhism because that's where I got my recovery, I was using the Buddhist teachings to help me recover. Yeah. So so that's what I want to say, that actually really this was my recovery program. And so when my publisher wrote to me and said, is there another book that you want to write? I really wanted to share my process of recovery through the Buddhist teachings. And so there are 8 steps. I always joke and just say, well, okay, those of you who are 12 steppers, you've got another 8 steps. And in a way, it can unpack that step where you have a relationship with prayer and meditation and God, whatever God looks like for you, good, orderly direction. So the first step is just accepting that this human life will bring suffering. And I'll just go through the steps because you can ask me about the steps if any of them spring to mind to you. But what I want to say is that just because of cultural appropriation, that the first 3 steps really are really resonating with the Four Noble Truths. So we've just made them more accessible. It's accepting this human life will bring suffering. Yeah. Step 2 is seeing how we create extra suffering in our lives. Step 3 is recognizing impermanence shows us that our suffering can end. Okay, so those are definitely the first 3 of the Noble Truths. And then we know that the 4th Noble Truth, there's a way out of suffering, and that way out is the Noble Eightfold Path. And we did think about actually going down that track, and I'm really glad we didn't, because the Noah's book, which is a good book, actually does follow the track of the 8-step, the noble 8-step, the noble. Now I'm mixing the 8-step and the noble eightfold path, which is why we didn't go down that path, because we were mixing them. But that's why we
Yeah.
got left with 8 steps. So the 4th step is being willing to step onto the path of recovery and discover freedom. The 5th step is transforming our speech, actions, and livelihood, which is the moral inventory. The 6th step is placing positive values at the center of our lives. Step 7 is making every effort to stay on the path of recovery. And step 8 is helping others to share the benefits I have gained. And maybe I can talk about the favorite steps.
Yeah.
My favorite, I have a couple. I think the first one, accepting that this human life will bring suffering. Because when I was in the hell realm of addiction, and it was a hell realm of addiction, although out there in the world I was very successful. In fact, actually, Gay Times just named me one of the top 10 Black gay icons to know in Gay Times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So and it's really interesting actually, because they look at what I contributed to the community, and I contributed that stuff while I was in the hell realm of addiction. Okay. So although out there in the world I was being perceived to being really successful, behind closed doors it was a hell realm of addiction. And I just thought that I was the only one who was suffering, you know, and more so, I thought that it was bad to suffer. Why was I suffering? I meant, why was I suffering? I shouldn't be suffering. And so when I learned this truth, this that suffering is inevitable because of this human condition, it was almost as if a light bulb was turned on in my whole being. It was a transformation overnight, that, oh, I'm not the only one who's suffering, and there's nothing wrong with suffering. This is part of the human condition. Yeah. And so of course, I could see with that second noble truth a path that leads to more suffering, because I could really clearly see how I was creating extra suffering in my life. So the four noble truths was just so fundamental to my recovery. And then I would say another favorite one of mine is placing positive values at the center of our lives. Because for me, there's a teaching in my Buddhist tradition, which Sangharakshita gave to us, which is going for refuge. One goes to for refuge to the Buddha, not the human being, but to what the Buddha attained, to emancipation, to freedom from our addictive behaviors, because even the self can be an addiction. And the prince, when he became woke and became a Buddha, actually said, these labels that identify me as a man, a god, a deva, etc., have been destroyed by me. And he was destroying these addictive, adaptive behaviors. Yeah. So, and then it's like we go for refuge to the Dharma and to the Sangha. But what I want to say is placing positive values. That's one thing you can place at your life. But actually, I mean, now I would say expansive values, because as somebody who is acting out through their addictions, they have got restrictive values at the center of their life. So alcohol, if it's at the center of your life, it's not expansive. If drugs is at the center of your life, it's not expansive. Because if it's really at the center of your life, what is it that you're doing? You're making all your choices around where you can get that next drink, all your choices around where you can get that next drug, or all your choices around when you're going to be able to look at porn again. And so really, this is a shift, how we can begin to push some of these things to the edge of the mandala, which I would say this is what your program, Mindful Drinking, is doing, is teaching people to push some of these things to the edge of their mandala, to the edge of their life, so that actually they're not dominated or consumed by alcohol when it's at the center of their lives. So I think this is a really important teaching. And then the last one, I think, for me, is making every effort to stay on the path of recovery, because it's so easy to get complacent. I've been in recovery for over 20 years. Well, I think as soon as I came into the world, I went into recovery. What is recovery? I think actually when people pick up the alcohol, the drug, or whatever the addictive behavior is, they are going into recovery. It's self-medication, isn't it? This is addictive behaviors is. I mean, we do it for a reason, and we are self-medicating. I mean, nobody says anything to the person who goes to the doctor and gets a prescription written for their pharmaceutical drug that they're attached to or addicted to. So it is self-medication. So I just think, since the moment I was born, I've been in recovery. But for the sake of this conversation, this making every effort to stay on the path of recovery, it's not like you have to make every effort day one or day 6 or after 6 months. It's just different. And
Yeah.
for me, making every effort to stay on the path of recovery is that when I see the bottle of alcohol that I like, I do nothing.
Hmm.
When I see the big cream cake, I do nothing. Yeah, that's the effort, or if I'm at a party and I'm aware that, occasionally I might be at a party and I'm aware that there's a room and there's some drug taking going on, I do nothing. That's making every effort to
Yeah.
to to stay on the path to recovery. And doing nothing may be that I leave the party, you know
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
those are my, well, they're all my favorite steps, but those are the ones that I would talk about today.
Yeah, I think that thank you for that. Thank you for that reminder about staying on the path, and also the fact that it does change. And I think that for me is one of the reasons why in our course, we spend 7 lessons in one of our courses, talking about creating the life that you imagine. If you're going to, because that my experience is that sometimes people start this journey from a place of anger, anger with themselves, anger about alcohol or other substances, frustrated, desperately wanting to change. But that anger has a habit of burning itself out after 3 or 4 weeks. And then people find themselves post-rationalizing and saying maybe they made too much of a drama of it and find themselves back in the same cycle again. But actually having this sense of, no, if this substance, if alcohol or another substance isn't taking this central role in my life, that opens up space. And what am I going to fill that space with? What opportunity opens up if my life isn't revolving around alcohol or another substance? And that can be so motivating to keep going.
It can also be very scary too, can't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I can remember being asked once what was going to take the place of the food, and I was like, it was almost like you were asking me, do you want to go to Mars? Because I just couldn't fathom what was going to take the place of the food. And I was diagnosed as an extreme bulimic. I mean, I didn't keep anything down, and the binges that I went on were horrific. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
opening up that space to just be with the pain, you know,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
sometimes what takes the place of us picking up that glass or whatever it is, means that we have to be with the pain, which can be
Hmm.
so overwhelming. So it's, yeah, which is great that there are I mean, that's why 12 steps is successful in many ways. It's communities that actually, at least you can reach out and ask for help, which is
Yeah.
why all these communities, why your mindful drinking community is successful, why Buddhist recovery communities are successful, because there are people you can reach out for help. Because, I want to come back to the Buddhist teachings, and if we go back to the prince, the prince who vowed not to move from the spot until he found an end of suffering, and we know that he was assailed by all these mental states. Mara arose in his mind, and he was assailed by craving, he was assailed by aversion, by ill will, by boredom, all of those things that can actually activate us into addictive behaviors. And when Mara wasn't being successful, and this, of course, the illusion in his mind, and says, "Who gives you the right to the seat of enlightenment?" That shook the prince to his core. And what did the prince do? The prince asked for help. Yeah. And the prince asked for help and touched the earth. It was the earth. Let the earth goddess be my witness. Yeah. That interconnectedness. And one of the reasons why we remain sick or we don't recover is because we're ashamed to ask for help. We think we have to do it on our own.
Hmm.
Is such a crucial part of recovery. It's just ask for help. And
Yeah.
ask for help in the right places, because some people ask for help, and they know people are going to say no and shut them out. Self-fulfilling prophecy. But, kind of ask for help in the right places.
Yeah, absolutely. A really practical asking for help question. Somebody asked me this earlier this week, and it's with your experience as a meditation teacher, um, uh, a question that I wanted to bring to you was actually, and you've touched on this, the feelings of discomfort that people can feel, sitting for the first time, maybe in the early stages of stopping drinking, and just feeling assailed by all of the difficult thoughts and big feelings and just this intense discomfort that people can feel in that situation. What kind of practical steps do you think people can, or kind of attitudes or thoughts that people can bring to a practice of meditation in the early stages to help make it stick? Because my experience is that sometimes people go, it just doesn't work, I can't do it, and run away from it. How can people kind of stick with it when it gets difficult?
Okay, well, there's a few things. First of all, I want to say that I have meditation specifically for people in recovery on Insight Timer. There's 21 meditations, and it's specific for people in recovery, which means that they're not long, and which means that there's music underscored as well, because it can be really difficult just sitting quiet for 5 minutes. What I would also say is that when I'm working with the demographic of people in recovery, one of the things which is so crucial is when you lead a meditation is to inquire into people's experience. You don't just lead a meditation and move on. You are, who liked this? Yeah. And then you give a voice, who didn't like this? Yeah. What was going on for you? And you inquire. So you let people know that actually it's okay to find it difficult. Yeah. Because basically people who don't know about meditation assume that meditation is going to make you feel blissful and it's all going to be glossy and lovely. Yeah. And that isn't the case. So
Totally.
yeah. So if you sit down thinking it's only going to be all blissful, of course you're going to say this isn't working for me. Yeah, this isn't. But the practice is really turning towards whatever is arising, and it can be problematic. I was one of these people when I started meditating. I'd go into blissful states straight away. So it was so I got addicted to the blissful states. Get really pissed off if I wasn't having a good time in meditation. So Dru, that's what I would really say for anybody who's listening and works in the field of addiction, and you're wanting to do mindfulness practice and meditative practice. It's not just guiding the practice. The second part is inquiry, is inquiring into people's experience, because actually that's maybe one of the reasons why they actually had the addictions, that actually stuff happened in their childhood and there was nobody to talk to.
Yeah.
So we're actually creating the same conditions. Something violent is happening in their meditative experience and there is nobody to talk to. And we need to invite conversation, invite dialogue.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's excellent feedback for me as well as for the person who asked the question. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really rich, and thank you for bringing your experience and your wisdom to it. If people want to connect with you, what's the best ways of people finding you in the online world, I guess?
On the online world, I have a website, which is Valerie Mason-John.com. Or you can just Google me. I'll come up if you put 8-Steps Recovery. Just to let people know that I do have an online mindfulness-based addiction recovery course happening, which will begin December the 5th through to January the 1st. So check that out. And also, as well, we have a Buddhist Recovery Summit starting December the 3rd to December the 5th. So look up Buddhist Recovery Network, actually. And we are doing it so that the Brits and the Europeans can join us. So
Brilliant.
that's going to be an online summit as well. So, yeah. Okay.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll look forward to opportunities to connect with you again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a really enjoyable conversation, and thank you for the work that you are doing in the world. Yeah.
Cheers.